This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Tim in Tokyo. This week we double back to the beginning of my summer trip around the US and meet three of the many creators at the World Monster Headquarters studio in Minneapolis. We'll meet Peter Wartman, creator of the graphic novel Over the Wall and currently working on the sequel, Stonebreaker. He talks about why Over the Wall is still on his website even though the book is out. Then, Lynch, currently working on his graphic novel, The Zoo, which asks the question, does choice really exist? Finally, Lupi McGinty, creator of the webcomics Poppet and Bantam returns. She tells us about the live-action Calvin and Hobbes movie she made as a kid. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support. By the way, in this episode you'll hear MCAD mentioned several times. That's the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, which you'll hear much more about in next week's episode. Now here's my talk with Peter Wartman. Okay, so I'm at Monster World HQ.
World Monster Headquarters.
World Monster Headquarters. Okay, World Monster Headquarters. Now, I guess the name was changed from when I was last here. I don't remember what it used to be called.
It was Big Time Attic for a long time.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure what the whole story is, but yeah.
And I talked to Xander Cannon here 3 years ago. He's at San Diego Comic-Con as we're recording this. I'm talking with Peter Wartman, who is one of the folks here. Now, explain to me a little bit about how this place is organized.
Organized, that's a word. It's just a studio space that we all kind of pitch in, some rent money. Mm-hmm. There's not really any overarching organization, I guess, although, we always help each other to kind of pay for spaces at shows and stuff, or just sort of share our expertise. So, it's a way to kind of not work alone at home, I guess, and sort of support each other doing this stuff, which is great.
So, kind of putting together financial resources, and then also sort of cheering each other on aspect. Okay. Now, I read your comic online, let's see, Over the Wall.
Right.
And you said that's going to be published pretty soon?
So Over the Wall is already published.
Okay.
It's by Uncivilized Books, or Odd is sort of it's published by Odd Books, which is the children's line of Uncivilized Books. It's a local publisher. So that came out in 2013. I'm working on the sequel to Over the Wall, which is called Stonebreaker, and that's going to be coming out probably pretty soon from the same publisher.
Okay. And so tell us what that story is about.
Yeah, so it's sort of a young adult story. It's about this girl living next to this big abandoned city full of these kind of memory-eating monsters. And Over the Wall, her brother disappears. And everyone kind of loses memory of him, loses his name, and just sort of you have little snippets of his life. And so she wants to go find him, rescue him. Meets lots of monsters. Kind of there's, the large chase scenes with buildings getting destroyed, that kind of thing. But also it's just sort of a story about kind of coming of age. Sort of discovering yourself, that kind of stuff. So
right, yeah, because the brother and a few other boys are sent over the wall as kind of a coming of age.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and she doesn't do rules very well. The main character. So
Anya.
Anya, yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I thought that was interesting in part because, well, I can't remember, it's been a few years ago now, but I was reading what someone had written that our society should have some kind of coming of age rite
Sure.
or ceremony or something, and that's sort of dropped out of Western culture. Do you have anything in mind as far as that?
Not necessarily. I mean, in the story, it's not exactly not necessarily a positive thing. Although I can kind of see the value of it. I mean, I think there's something, there's something about this. The city is sort of hidden behind this sort of barrier, and a lot of history is forgotten. So there is this disconnect with the past in my story that I'm kind of wrestling with, which I think is maybe touching on that a bit. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I am interested in history. I'm kind of interested in the way that we sort of rewrite history to kind of fit, what we're thinking about in the modern era, and kind of forget things selectively. So there's a lot of that going on in that story too, that she's sort of uncovering unintentionally just by kind of being in that space.
And so obviously there's sort of a fantasy element to the story too. Well, like what were your influences there? What kind of stuff have you tended to read?
There's a bit of Hellboy in it, just sort of the demon thing. I was really into that comic kind of through college. It's sort of what got me into comics in general. I mean, I don't want to overstate that. Like, there's like sort of the Studio Ghibli kind of approach, is sort of what I'm really was trying to get at, I think. So it's sort of a grounded fantasy is sort of what I like to think about it. So like there's the magic isn't people aren't throwing fireballs around necessarily, but there are strange things and big monsters happening. But it's still sort of normal people trying to deal with those situations, right? So like Anya, she doesn't have any special powers. She's just a girl who is pretty good at running around a big abandoned city, but she doesn't have any, she has to use her wits to kind of get by, and I'm kind of interested in that. Those kinds of stories of just where like the power, like the differences in power between the protagonists and sort of their antagonists, or the world they find themselves in is pretty great, right? I don't know. It's not a power fantasy. That's what I think I'm trying to get at. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I can see the Studio Ghibli angle. Like Miyazaki often has young female
for sure.
heroines. Yeah. So, and the art was maybe a little Japanese influenced.
I mean, it's definitely there. Yeah. I do think I'm dragging a lot from the Ghibli stuff, but I don't know.
But yeah, I can kind of see the Hellboy too. Now that you
this Hellboy, I think there's there's a little bit of Bone kind of in there too. Which I mean, there's definitely some Disney. So I don't know. I try to grab a lot of influences.
I see. So I was interested that the first book has been published, but it's still on your website.
Yep.
Now, I guess the conventional wisdom would be that you're cannibalizing your sales.
Yeah.
What do you think?
That's a good question. I mean, maybe. So part of it is that the printed book, I rewrote the first half of it pretty much. Like it's edited and very much fixed and much better than the online version.
So what's online is the old version.
You can sort of think of like I'm putting the first draft online.
I see.
That's a lot. It's kind of the same way with Stonebreaker too. But I think in the webcomic kind of world, like it's fairly common. Where you sort of build the audience with the webcomic, but people still want the physical book, right? Just partially to support the artist, partially because having that physical thing is better. I also like throwing some sketches in the back and stuff to kind of make it a little more
extra content that's only in the print version.
Yeah. I think, like, just in a kind of a business sense, I think that the value of getting the audience through having the comic and having that following makes it worth, keeping that up, right? You get that word of mouth. You get people who like your stuff. I think that pays for itself. But
Okay.
That's just it's my excuse, maybe. Yeah.
So what kind of things do you do to promote your work?
Not much beyond, just having a social media platform. I'm going to start trying to be a little more proactive about that, but because I'm finally kind of doing this thing more full time than I have been in the past. So, I mean, like most people have like a Patreon, or they're able to do Kickstarter campaigns and stuff like that. A lot of it, I think, is just having something consistently coming out, and then you have people just kind of will start following you, I guess, if they like it. It's just, I don't know. Doesn't seem to be any like hard and fast like rules of doing this, but yeah.
You doing a lot of conventions?
Yeah, for sure. I mean that's the other thing I've been trying to be consistent about. So.
Which ones have you gone to?
SPX, TCAF I was just at. I haven't really done much of the mainstream stuff. It's mostly been kind of the indie comics scene, which I feel like I'm kind of in this weird space where I might work at both, and I don't really fit in with either.
Well, if you could grab like the Bone audience.
I mean, I guess that, like sort of the young adult, sort of graphic novel comic scene is really starting to become a huge thing now, so... I shouldn't say like I don't really belong. Like that is kind of what the scene is turning into. So, but I mean, I do tend to. I like the indie comic conventions more, just because they seem to be more focused on the artists, and there's sort of that community there that I enjoy.
Yeah.
But,
I wish I'd been in town at the right time for. I guess there was a convention here.
Atoptic it's called. Yeah, Atoptic.
Atoptic.
Yeah, it's one of those names that no one can remember. It's just weird, but I think that's going to be happening again next year, so it's sort of intermittent. But
okay. Somebody mentioned a different one too.
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of the like the one that's been around for a long time is like Spring Con and Fall Con. Those are kind of the more mainstream comic conventions. I'm trying to think if there's another one.
And there's one that, like, I guess Dan Jurgens is involved in.
Maybe.
That's supposed to be, I guess, next month.
There's going to be FanFest. Yeah, that's coming. It's in St. Paul. Yeah, I think August 20th, I want to say. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's lots of stuff happening in Minneapolis now, so. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Minneapolis is maybe more of a comics town than I realized last time I was here.
I think like within the last, and maybe this is just because I'm kind of coming into the scene now, but in the last like 5 or so years, it really feels like it's been kind of becoming more and more that, like it's sort of started to take off more. I think in part because there's a lot of people coming out of MCAD in the comics scene. Maybe I don't know. It just feels like we have sort of a critical mass starting to build. It feels like to me. So
yeah. But comics artists tend to be sort of isolated, and like.
So there's probably like a lot of us here who just never talk to each other. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, so 3 years ago when I was here, I talked to this guy named Gordon McAlpin.
Okay.
Who does a comic that I can't remember the name of right now, but it's about people who work in a movie theater. Well, I reached out to him before this trip, and now he doesn't live in town anymore. He lives like in Boston or something. But I asked if he knew anybody I could interview, and he said he never got around to getting in touch with anyone else in the community here while he was living here. I guess he was going to graduate school at the same time, so it's kind of understandable.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah. I mean, it's a solitary kind of life, so... I mean, that's part of why, like this World Monster Headquarters thing is great, because you're sort of forced to be around other people, which is healthy.
Yeah.
So.
Right, yeah, so you're not just at your drawing table all the time.
I mean, you still are at the drawing table, you're just at the drawing table with other people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you said you're doing this closer to full-time now?
Yeah.
You doing some freelance work too, or?
Yeah, I got some stuff that are going to be happening.
Okay.
So that's all I can say.
Well, what do you wish you'd known about freelancing before you started?
So you talked to me, I think, like 4 weeks into this, so maybe I don't quite know yet.
Okay, just getting started.
Yeah. I feel like I set myself up pretty well to do this. Like, I don't have much debt, or any debt really. I've got some projects lined up that I think will be able to keep me going. Healthcare is scary. Like, that's kind of the big thing. But yeah, I'm still kind of figuring this out. Like, I feel like I'll know more in a year. But
I see.
Yeah, I mean, I do think like the freelance thing is so kind of self-directed that it's hard to really know quite where to. Like, what are the best practices? What do you need to do? I don't know. It's
So you're still kind of figuring it out.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Describe your typical work routine.
I mean, it's. Yeah, I don't know. I sit down and draw mostly.
Okay. Are you working electronically? Or?
I am, yeah. I work with a program called Clip Studio. It used to be Manga Studio.
Okay.
I think it's becoming kind of the standard. Yeah, I think kind of the schedule I've been trying to keep is just sort of like a page a day. Mondays maybe I'll use for like some script writing and some like thumbnailing. Something too fancy. I mean, my process is pretty much the standard: pencils, inks. I do some tones and lettering. Nothing really too out of the ordinary, but yeah.
Do you have any time to read comics these days?
God, I wish. Yeah, that's always the issue. Is you spend so much time drawing. I think most of the media I've been actually like taking in has been like podcasts and books and tape, because I can do that, or audiobooks, I guess. You don't use tape anymore. So you can just like put headphones on, and while I'm like inking, I can listen to something else. So it really has become what's something I can do at the same time as I'm drawing. You know?
Right. Yeah. Hard to read comics while you're drawing.
Yeah, it's a little too distracting. I feel like I should read more comics. That would make sense. I think that would be helpful. But I don't know. I think audiobooks are great. I think podcasts are great. Kind of the fuel that keeps me going. So
Yeah, it's tough to. Well, I mean, most of the comic reading I do is for stuff to review on the podcast or for people I'm going to be interviewing.
You have that kind of that push to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, just to get it onto the schedule. Well, recently we read like all of Transmetropolitan, 60 issues. So
I haven't read that thing in a long time.
It was tough kind of getting started, and I was working on another episode at the same time, and I got that done, and then I got into a rhythm where I was reading 3 issues every day. I got to then when I finished, I was like, oh, there's nothing more to read. I felt a little bit lost, but I need to do the same thing with my regular comics reading. That's not necessarily for a specific episode of the podcast.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is there a genre that you like to read but you can't picture yourself working on?
Genre. I mean, I'm not sure if this entirely fits. Most of what I listen to is actually, I guess, read because they're books, but I'm listening to them. It's kind of just like history. Like it's not even fictional. Just sort of like straight up. What happened to the Roman Empire kind of stuff. I'm not sure how that would translate into a comic. I don't think it would be enjoyable to try.
Like a historical?
Yeah, just like straight up historical. I mean, that'd be an interesting project, I guess. I mean, I do think like kind of my listening interests are pretty kind of divergent from what I'm doing. Like I do grab a lot from it, Like I said, I'm kind of interested in doing history, so I like having kind of that basis. But it's not fiction, It's not. It's still storytelling, but in kind of a weird way.
Yeah, well, I think there have been some attempts at that fairly recently. I don't know how good they were.
Yeah, I'm just not sure if comics really fit that kind of like dry,
well, it depends.
Stuff.
I mean, if you can turn it into a narrative that's interesting.
Yeah. In some cases, like, there's never enough information, I think, in like kind of like if you're doing something that's supposed to be really accurate history, there's never going to be enough information to get a really good personal story out of it, unless you have lots of like primary sources. So you're just going to end up making up stuff to make the story work, which is totally fine. Like, I love historical fiction, and you can, there's value in it. But it's, it's sort of, it's a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. A few months ago, I read some comic I stumbled across on Comixology that was, I think, based on, I think it was like trying to tell history around the Norman invasion, I think.
Okay.
And so, like in the 11th century in the UK and France, and yeah, it wasn't very good. I thought it was just kind of dry and it was kind of hard to follow.
Yeah, I think the problem is like you're gonna inevitably like run into like long pages of exposition, right? To just have like disjointed like scenes with like gigantic like text boxes.
I think that wasn't too much of a problem. It was just there were too many characters, too much going on.
Yeah.
And it was kind of hard to grasp everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think to answer the question, I think the kinds of stories I like to tell are like extremely decompressed, like very character focused, right? Sort of, like, I mean, I'll spend like 6 panels or so showing someone's like emotional state change, and I'm interested in that kind of thing. But like that's really not suited to a broad strokes historical overview of a, of a setting. A comic
would be better if you were telling the story of maybe some fictional character within that framework, rather than explaining the whole history.
Yeah, which does actually sound kind of interesting. So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, movies do the same thing.
You have to focus in on something.
Just trying to tell the whole story is. I mean, you might as well just do a documentary.
Yeah. Actually, like I feel like a lot of modern kind of movies, especially kind of the Marvel stuff, like they're starting to get to this point where there's just too many characters. Not even like we're talking not even like historical things, but just sort of that things are too broad. There's not enough like focus on like the one character or something. I don't know. It's just something that kind of annoys me. I like stories that are a little more intimate with, a smaller group of characters, and sort of how are they dealing with a situation that's bigger than them, kind of a thing. So
yeah, I haven't been keeping up on the Marvel movies, and as listeners know, I don't make it to many movies in general. But my impression is that they've been trying to turn it into the same kind of continuity fest that the comics are,
which is like my biggest problem with like the comics is that
right, and make it impenetrable to newbies.
Yep, it's a huge problem. And then you also get into that situation where a story can never end because like they have to keep saving the world until that there are no stakes anymore. It's been covered before.
Yeah, I mean, one of the guys who helps me with the podcast, Mulele, I mean, that's been his pet peeve about Marvel for a long time, that he thought it just got to be, too much going on and it never ends.
Yeah.
He wants a self-contained story.
Yeah.
You generally can't get that from superhero comics. I mean, you sort of can. I mean, you get to a point that you could call the end, but it's just feeding into the next thing. Let's see. What's the best advice you've heard from new creators?
That's a good question. I always feel like this is such like there's so much you have to learn to do this stuff. Sometimes it's hard to think of the right advice. I think maybe it's that, especially with comics, like the industry is, especially right now, it's so self-directed and there's so many different ways of getting into it that it's just very hard to come up with any one good advice about what you should do.
Right, yeah, I've heard before, like,
Yeah.
everybody gets into comics a different way.
Yes, absolutely. And your circumstances that you're starting out from are really going to influence, like what you need to do. Like in some ways, that's kind of a cool thing that it is so self-directed. There are so many different opportunities, but it's also extremely daunting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. This is not really actionable advice. I mean, I guess I'll say, I think it took me about 7 years after I left college to really start finding, I'm just starting this now, but to find sort of any kind of making money off comics, Yeah, so I think there's a lot still about, like, you have to be, in your early 20s, and if you're not, like, making money immediately, you're never going to succeed. I think there's some of that. I'm speaking as a 30-year-old, so I'm still pretty young, I think, in terms of being successful at this. But there isn't like an age limit, right? So maybe it's that, like, be prepared to spend some time doing a day job, doing comics on the side, kind of building up your reputation. That worked for me anyway. But again, everyone's gonna be different. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, I wonder about, like, my situation, because, well, I'm spending so much time doing podcasts that I don't get my comics done anymore. I used to make comics like 10 years ago. And I don't think anybody was reading it anyway, but and my art is not that great. But I'm not sure if I'm really going to make a run at it, what I would need to do other than maybe get some art training.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there are no set paths. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 52. But I don't feel like that would necessarily be a problem as long as I could do something that people would read.
Yep. I mean, and especially kind of with sort of social media stuff and webcomics and that whole thing. I mean, yeah, you're both competing with a lot of people now who are doing some amazing stuff, but it's there aren't any gatekeepers, and that's kind of a great thing. Then it's just a matter of finding the audience, and that's sort of alchemy. I'm not really sure how to make that work either, but.
Well, I've been trying to figure out how to use social media well, like with promoting the podcast stuff, and I think some people who haven't tried it get the impression that if you just put stuff up there, that it's going to bring you a million clicks.
Not necessarily.
No.
No. And sometimes you just get lucky, right? You'll get someone who has a lot of followers already, who are sort of into the same things you are, and they'll or retweet something that you did, and then you get a bunch of followers all of a sudden. Yeah, I don't know. But I don't know. I'm definitely not someone who's an expert on this stuff. I'm still kind of figuring it out. So I wish I could give good advice on how to build an audience online, but mostly I just post images.
Are you originally from this area?
I'm from Duluth originally.
Duluth,
so.
okay.
Well, I'm from Colorado originally, but I grew up in Duluth most of my childhood, so yeah.
Okay. So what brought you down here then?
I went to MCAD.
Okay.
I actually studied illustration, although I was almost a comics minor. But yeah, I don't know. I like the city a lot. I like Minnesota a lot, so there's never any real urge to leave it.
Yeah. I see.
Peter Wartman's site is shipwreckplanet.com. Coming up, Sean Lynch explores the concept of choice, and Lupi McGinty tells us about the live-action Calvin and Hobbes movie she made as a kid. Thanks to our patrons, this past week I released the vintage episode 118 from March 10th, 2008, in which I interviewed colorist Brian Miller. This week's vintage episode is number 117, in which we discuss webcomics that were free online that people subsequently paid to read on paper. And what does it all mean? Watch for it at the end of your podcast feed, on our Facebook page, or at patreon.com/deconcomics, where you can pledge a monthly amount to keep the show going and unlock more vintage episodes. We appreciate your support.
Are you willing to follow me on a journey and risk getting lost in the swirling maze of past ages, protected only by our red indestructible capes as we break through the final unexplored realm of the time barrier to explore the fantastic Silver Age adventures of the world's greatest hero, Superman? If so, join me each week on the Superman Fan Podcast, as together we'll follow the Man of Steel, his cousin Supergirl, and his closest friends, Perry White, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Lana Lang, Batman and Robin, and others in Superman's never-ending quest to defend truth and justice in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, World's Finest Comics, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, and Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane. Go to the supermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com, available on iTunes and most other podcast aggregators. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Medium, Flipboard, and Stitcher. And after you listen, feel free to send email to supermanfanpodcast@gmail.com. And unless you request otherwise, I look forward to reading your comments on future episodes. And don't forget to wear your red indestructible cape, standard safety equipment for traveling through the time barrier.
My name is Sean Lynch.
Okay, and what kind of comic do you do?
Right now I'm working on a book called The Zoo, which is a sci-fi fantasy book about whether or not choice exists. And
okay. About whether or not choice exists. Explain that a little more.
Yeah, I think that it's hard to sometimes know whether or not we have the ability to actually choose things that we do. And I like the concept of empowerment and being able to actually, I guess, express that in a comic book is kind of my goal with The Zoo. And there's just a lot of fun opportunity to also draw the kinds of things that I really enjoy. Like I get to draw lots of insects, and I get to draw lots of like space creatures, and then lots of different environments, and then kind of interweave them together with different themes and topics. That's kind of my favorite. So.
I see. Yeah, this interview is a little impromptu, and I haven't actually seen your work, so to ask you about it. So, what's sort of the target audience?
I guess it would be of an audience that kind of knows more of contemporary, like TV, or like a Netflix type audience that just likes a serialized story that they can get in kind of like a large chunk. I think that's kind of an interesting thing that we've been fortunate enough to experience, where we actually get to kind of binge watch stuff or get to see a large chunk of it. And then also I think that the quality of stuff has really been appealing these days, and I think that's what our audience is kind of looking for, and I'd like to appeal to those audiences if possible.
Okay. So what have you, like, what kind of things have you tended to read or watch, or what are your influences?
I actually think that the influences I have for storytelling are, again, more from like a HBO or like a long serialized format, or like long serialized formats even like in comics. And then the experiences, I guess, of just like kind of growing up and having a really weird life, kind of those day-to-day things are really what I try to draw from for experience.
Okay. So. How are you publishing the comic?
Well, right now I'm actually just working on pages for it. I'm working on publishing the comic in coming like the next 6 months or so.
Will this be self-published, or are you a publisher?
Well, I'm actually kind of exploring that right now, and there's so many options that it's kind of hard to really actually put a finger on which one it's going to be. And so I still have freelance opportunities as well, which is really nice. So I just finished a thing for Heavy Metal Magazine that's going to be at San Diego. That was a 10-page book, or not book, but a short story that I did with Clive Barker and Nine Inch Nails. And my intern Hannah Jerry colored that. And I'm really excited to see that magazine at San Diego, because you get to see all sorts of photos and whatnot posted online. So yeah.
I see. Okay. Are you from this area?
Yeah. I'm from Minneapolis. Or well, I'm from Brooklyn Park, but then nobody knows where that is. So you say you say the Twin Cities. I guess is probably the easiest way to say it. But Minneapolis for sure. And it's kind of funny because a lot of the cartoonists here live in Uptown, but then have a studio in Northeast. So we all come down here. Or come up here, I guess we should say.
Okay. So what made you decide to join this studio?
It's kind of like a home away from home, where you get to work and kind of focus, and there's other people around you, like working and focusing, and I don't know. I mentioned before earlier that it kind of feels like a Ron Weasley house, like something like that, and where there's just a lot of productivity, and that's a great environment to be in. And I sometimes think about people as like goldfish, and that you can grow to be the size of your container, but then also that you're made out of the water that's there. And I think that World Monster is just it's a great place to be. I really enjoy having a spot here.
Now, are you working like all electronically?
Well, I was classically trained, so I learned painting and printing and drawing from a fine art perspective, and then over the past 3 years I picked up a Microsoft Surface, and I started working a lot with that, and then and then mixing in traditional media, and that ended up being my favorite and the direction I started working in. So everything now eventually gets a finalized polish on the computer for sure.
Okay, so you like do work on paper and scan it in then? Or?
I sometimes do. I generally don't need a scanner that often, because the things I scan in are more like, if I'm going to scan something, it's going to be something that needs to be like 1200 DPI or something like that, like really high res. But if it's just like a sketch, I'll just take a photo on my phone and send that to my computer and just work directly from that on the computer. But I mean, I also come from a programming background, so I used to be like a front end programmer at Best Buy, so I used to make their websites and stuff. But so to me, the computer environment is kind of a natural thing. I feel really fortunate that I don't have to live in a time and age where I have to go out and mix my paints and create my inks, and I get to draw in a studio with air conditioning. It's pretty rad, on a computer. So
Easy. Okay. Now, are you doing this full time, or are you?
Yeah. I was working again as a computer programmer, front end dev at Best Buy, and then I recently quit my job about, I think, 3 months ago, and then I've just been doing freelance jobs and then working on my book, and then kind of growing in the community. So.
Is there anything that you wish you had known 3 months ago that you know now about freelancing?
I don't know. Actually, it's kind of been a breath of fresh air for me. I'm really glad that I took the direction that I did. So I wish that I would have done it sooner. I wish that 3 months ago I could have told myself 3 months ago from there that you should have quit sooner, and that you should have been focusing on the things that really matter instead of chasing down a dollar. But unfortunately, you have to do that, and at any time, I totally accept that I might have to go back to doing that, and that's fine. It's just how it goes. So, but I'm really fortunate that I had that experience. But I'm very, very glad that I'm here now.
Okay. Anything that you do to like recharge your creative batteries? What do you do when you just don't feel like working?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Yeah, I do silly things like I'll watch like Apple II infomercials from the 80s in like slow motion on YouTube, so everything sounds like super slowed down, where a guy's talking about an Apple II computer and how it comes with uppercase and lowercase. I think shit like that's pretty funny. Or I think that I just look at a lot of art too. That's always super inspiring. And then I kind of have tendencies to, as soon as I have time, like downtime, I fill it up as fast as possible. So it's kind of hard to actually recharge. I feel like I'm just kind of always perpetually going, I guess.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Are you doing many conventions?
I'm doing FanFest coming up. I think that's in August. Then I don't have anything planned off of that because really I'm just kind of working on a book. Then once the book finds its way to a publisher, then I'll be working on that. So, but I don't have any conventions planned beyond FanFest right now. But I can usually weasel my way into a spot at somebody's table at one of the conventions. There's always somebody that you can find that will like give you like a couple feet at a table or something like that. So,
I see. Have you been using social media very much to promote your work?
I've been starting to actually with like Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. I guess it's kind of like the normal thing. But Instagram's kind of my favorite. I really like just that you just get to share stuff quickly. You get to, share the positivity, that creativity, and show it off real fast. I think that's real cool. And that's been kind of interesting for me to kind of step out into that because you get like immediate reactions from people, and that's super valuable and really fun to see and participate in, and get to comment on other people's work as well. I think that's a really cool thing that we get to have as well. So yeah, just kind of stepping out into it, and I guess that soon I'll have to be a little bit more aware of that because of some of the stuff that I've worked on that'll be coming out. So.
Sean Lynch is at seanandrewlynch.tumblr.com.
Okay, so now I'm talking with Lupi McGinty.
Hello.
Hello. And so how long have you been working in this studio?
Several years. I don't remember exactly how long, but it's been a while. I've been working on a couple of webcomics out of here and some freelance work, some graphic design, and I also work on a series called Cartosia Tales. So we've been busy. Been busy up here.
Yeah, I had some time to read some of, what was it called, Poppet?
Oh, yeah.
Now, when did you do that? Is that a little while ago, or?
I did a children's book, just a picture book, bilingual in English and Spanish about the character. I think that was in 2012. I self-published that, and then I started doing a webcomic based on that character. And it's kind of been on hiatus while I've been focusing on other projects that actually pay, so.
Yeah, well, I thought it was interesting. It was kind of manic, just kind of whatever came to your mind, kind of what happened.
Yeah, and I had like an idea of where the story was going to go, but I didn't script it out because I was kind of just doing it for practice, just to practice doing a comic in watercolor and learning to work quickly in that way. All the inking was done with a brush, and then I would wait for that to dry and then paint over it, and so it was just kind of like a means for me to like get into a rhythm working that way, and also practice telling a story. So that was kind of my practice webcomic, and I got to be pretty fast. I got to a point where I would have like 4 pages that I was working on at once, and I would sketch them all out. I sketched with like a watercolor pencil, and then ink over that, and then wet all the pages, and the watercolor pencil will just be washed away, and then I can paint over it. And I got to be pretty fast, but then I injured my hand and stopped working on it for a while, got some other work, and just kind of haven't been able to pick it up again.
Okay, so tell us about the comics that you're working on now.
Right now I'm working on Bantam Returns, which is ridiculous. It's something that I'm doing just for my own amusement. I did a comic, a first Bantam comic years ago, and it's stupid. It's so stupid. It's a Bantam, like the breed of rooster, the breed of chicken, is an anagram of Batman. So the whole thing's just a Batman parody with chickens. Like, oh, like that's never been done before. But I got a lot of bad puns in it, and I think, like I'm just poking fun at the genre, and also kind of like working through some of my anxieties and imposter syndrome through this comic. So there's a little bit of weird stuff about like gender in it, and just like what it feels like to be a woman in this industry and have people asking all the time, just the kind of stupid questions you get, like, so how does being a woman affect the way you approach comics? And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, how does being a man affect the way you approach comics? It's just, I just want to tell stories, but everything just gets so fraught. So I'm kind of like working through some of my feelings about that through this comic, and it's very silly.
I see. And then you publishing something too, or are you a different webcomic, or what else? So,
I'm publishing that on Tapas Media right now. Okay. But when I've got all the pages finished, I'm gonna I self-published the first one through a printer I've used called Lightning Source, and they do a really good job printing. So I'm gonna do the second one through them at all. Then I'll have 2 short Bantam volumes. I also work on it
published by Bantam. That would be.
Oh yeah, I know, right? There would probably be so many copyright issues with that. Doing that through a legit publisher, it probably wouldn't happen. But I'm also working on a series called Cartosia Tales, which is this really cool map jam concept. I work on it with a group of other artists and writers, and what we did was we collaborated via email and Google Docs to create a map, a fantasy world, and we came up with lots of like kooky, it's not like standard fantasy. Like we do have some dragons and things that you might see in a standard fantasy story, but we really wanted to dig into our own imaginations and do the kinds of kooky, funny things that we enjoyed, but that you don't see in many stories. So there's also like a race of frog people. And one of the dragons that we do have in the story is just very long and thin and ties itself in knots all the time. So we're having fun and just really experimenting with it. But the map we created is divided into a grid. So for each issue, each cartoonist is assigned a section of the map to work in, and it gets shuffled around every time. So we're always continuing each other's stories. It's really fun. It's like getting to play with your friends' toys.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. We were talking a little bit in between interviews here about publicizing yourself and social media and that kind of thing. So what have you been doing to promote your work?
Well, I have my own website. I have a Tumblr account, and I'm on Instagram, and I try to keep my branding fairly consistent through, between various platforms that I use. So I guess Instagram is probably the most fun one for me. I'm also on Twitter. I've been told I'm not using the right hashtags though, so I guess I'm not savvy enough anymore to really do a good job at this. But I'm also on several different websites that print artists' work for consumers, like Society 6, Threadless, Designed by Humans. I have artist shops across a few different sites, so I've made some sales that way too.
Okay. And then going to conventions?
Oh, yeah. I always do the local show in town here, the MSP Comic Cons. They do it twice a year. This year I went to Glasgow Comic Con, which was really cool. It was my the first time I physically exhibited at a show in Europe. I did have a copy of Bantam that was displayed in a zine show in Paris several years ago, but this is the first time I've actually traveled overseas to do a show in Europe, and that was a lot of fun. I'm also.
How was that different from an American show?
It wasn't really. It was pretty much the same as
people had Scottish accents.
Yeah, I mean, it really reminded me a lot of our local show here, because there were a lot of people in costume who I could tell had been coming to this show for years and just really enjoyed it. There was a pretty good ratio of independent creators to higher tier people. A lot of people selling little toys and things that they've made by hand. It was really cool. It was a fun experience. The only thing that was strange and different about it was figuring out how to price all my prints and pins and things in pounds instead of dollars, and trying to work out how much money I'd lose converting my money back to dollars when I went home.
Yeah, that was
a little complicated.
Were there any other Americans there?
Not that I saw. There was a table for the Wicked and the Divine, and I think, are they American? The writer and artist on that series? I don't know. Everyone I met there was either from England or Scotland. But I would assume they might have had, since they did have some higher tier guests from the industry, there probably was maybe another American or two.
Yeah, I'm wondering who those higher tier people would have been.
They had, I know they had Frank Quitely there. There was that exhibit of his work in Glasgow, but he, of course, is from Scotland, so.
Yeah. Okay, but yeah, that's pretty high tier.
Yeah.
Do you have a chance to read comics these days?
Not really. Not really. I don't read a lot of mainstream comics anyway. Usually I gravitate more toward the weird independent stuff, or smaller press works. I've been reading a lot of novels this year. I've just read Train Spotting, because going to Scotland made me want to read some Scottish books. And I've been reading, hey, Izzy, what else did I read this year? I can't remember, so I'm asking my kid. I read the Warrior Cats books with my daughter. She's 12, and she's really into those, so I've read some of them with her. And I've been reading some Octavia Butler, and I just read the March series, so I guess that was the most recent comic that I read, was March.
So John Lewis.
Yeah,
okay.
And that's excellent. It's really great.
What did you grow up reading, comics-wise?
Calvin and Hobbes.
Okay.
There wasn't a comic shop that I could walk or ride my bike to. I lived in a suburban neighborhood. It was just really, it was just really vanilla and boring. And, yeah, so the only comics I really had access to were the ones in the newspaper. So that's what I grew up reading. And Calvin and Hobbes was probably the biggest influence on me and my art. I actually made a Calvin and Hobbes movie when I was maybe 14 or so. I wrote my own script. Some of it was based on the comics, and some of it was my own invention. And I got some kids in the neighborhood who I was babysitting together to, do makeup and costumes and actually film a movie.
Okay, so this was a live action Calvin and Hobbes movie.
Yeah, with my parents' camcorder on VHS.
So how did you do Hobbes then? Did you have a stuffed tiger and then someone to act as the tiger when Calvin sees him?
I think that we had a kid wearing tiger makeup, and I spent an hour doing this face paint every time we filmed everything to paint this girl up like a tiger. And I think she was just wearing I don't know, like track shorts and a t-shirt with this tiger makeup. And I can't remember whether we did a stuffed tiger or not, or whether we just had her sit very still when there were other people in frame. But it was fun.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Have you seen this comic? Kind of off topic here, but there's this comic that's out now that's called Spencer and Locke.
No.
And it's Calvin and Hobbes as a noir story.
Oh my gosh, that sounds cool.
It's bizarre. I mean, it sounds sort of like it shouldn't work, but it's done well enough that it kind of works. Well, the first issue was submitted to us by the creator, because we do critiques of people's comics on the show, and I was interested enough that I've kept reading the subsequent issues. But yeah, it's interesting. And the artist does a really good imitation of Watterson. But anyway, let's see.
I've seen some other Calvin and Hobbes knockoffs like that. There's a local cartoonist, Andy Singer. Do you know him?
I feel like I should know that name.
He did a Calvin and Hobbes spoof. It was Nietzsche and I can't remember, but it might have been like Nietzsche and Locke or something. But it was kind of, it's the same idea where he was taking like Watterson's art style and just putting in just ridiculous text with it. And there's one that the Nib has been publishing too. It's like Calvin and Hobbes style, but it's making fun of Trump. And I think I can't remember what it's called now, but it has Trump and his imaginary publicist who's telling him to do all these crazy things. You've seen it? Do you remember what it's called?
I know the imaginary publicist is a real thing, but I can't remember what he calls that. The name of that imaginary publicist was. I haven't seen the comic. No. I'll have to look it up. Who was the creator?
Andy Singer did the Nietzsche one. I can't remember who's doing the Trump one, but the Nib has been posting a lot of those online.
The Nib. Okay.
I'm completely unhelpful.
Can you describe your typical work routine?
No. I don't have just one routine. I should, but some days I'll come in and I'll write first and draw later. Some days I'll mess around on the internet and read for a while to get my brain going, and then sketch. Sometimes I work on paper with ink and watercolor. Sometimes I work digitally. So I'm doing all kinds of different things.
Okay. What kind of things do you read, to get yourself going?
News stories. I'll read the news. I try not to read too much news in the morning because I kind of get sucked into it. There's a lot of very strange things going on in the world. But I really like reading history books and novels, a little bit of everything.
Okay. What's the best advice you've heard for new creators?
Just keep doing. Just whatever you want to do it, and do it every day. And even if you think that what you're doing isn't good enough, keep doing it, because that's how you get better at it. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. If you do something and it doesn't turn out right, then screw it. You don't have to show anyone. Just try again tomorrow.
Okay. Are you from this area?
No, I grew up in the Cincinnati area.
I see. So what brought you to Minneapolis?
My husband got a job with Target, and he worked there for many years. And when I came up here with him and found the art scene here, it was there was no going back for me. I feel much more at home here than I ever did in the place where I grew up.
Interesting.
Bantam Returns and Lolly Poppet are both available at tapas.io. All three artists' work is linked from the show notes. Tell us what you think. Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, Twitter @deconcomics. Like our Facebook page or join our Facebook discussion group. Find all the links on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. We're also on YouTube, on the Comics Podcast Network at comicspodcasts.com, and on comicon.com, where our new episodes appear a few days before they show up anywhere else. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or iHeartRadio. We really need more listeners to give us reviews and help us stand out from the many comics podcasts that are out there. Our theme is from bensound.com. Last Thursday on To the Bat Poles, we looked at the first draft script of Shoot a Crooked Arrow, featuring The Archer, and figured out what went wrong in Batman's Season 2 premiere. Look up To the Bat Poles wherever you find your podcast, or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. The next episode is coming up this Thursday right here in this podcast feed. Next week, a look at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, MCAD, and a bit of comparison of the various comics art schools in the U.S. You'll hear my interview with Barbara Schultz, who helped build the comics degree program at MCAD and currently teaches many of the courses there. Also some discussion of MCAD with John Bivens, who taught at MCAD during the summer, and Elliot Rahal. How important is accreditation in searching for a school? What questions should you ask if you want to study comics art but can't decide between MCAD, the Kubert School, Center for Cartoon Studies, or one of the other schools? That and more next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.